The mainstream media is in real trouble, and it was, it's funny, I keep entering media at exactly the wrong time. So I entered print media in back in the late 90s, and that's when blogs were all the rage. And so they started hacking away at their columnist and editorial budgets because why would you pay for a newspaper to get that when you could get it for free online? And so the equivalent happened when I entered into broadcast media again. That was really, I think of Rebel Media as having been the media agency that really created the model in Canada for radio and television. And I think here's part of the problem for alt media is that the issue of trying to build your subscriber base comes down to putting out stories that will require people to click through the stories and watch them. That's sort of the model. And so there can be, if you're not careful, a tendency towards doing clickbait, right? Where you just do stories from one perspective with the sole purpose of racking up the likes. That's the danger that can happen. But I think that's changing, really. When you look at, say, the other side of it, and I'll look at Canada Lens as an example, that would we even be talking about We Charity if they hadn't been bird dogging that issue for a year and doing the work that they did? It was even remarkable when the story did break, how the mainstream media would say, news has broken that. And so Jesse Brown, I would watch his Twitter feed. He said, no, news just doesn't break itself. Give us credit, dudes. And I think finally he did end up getting them to give him credit on a number of it. But that to me is the beautiful way in which alternative media and mainstream media can work together. Because I don't know that anyone could have found that story if it hadn't been Canada Lands, but turning it into a major issue for the government, that needed the mainstream media to take it seriously and to report on it the way they did. And I think that once the story was broken by Canada Lands, the mainstream media did their job. So I've always paid attention to what happens in the alt media, and I'll give credit on the other side to Ezra Levant. Would we have known that the government of Canada was allowing Chinese soldiers to train and monitor our exercises if he hadn't been writing about that? I'm sure Post Millennial is in the same position where it's broken stories that ended up getting picked up by the mainstream media. True North has as well, and so to me that's the beauty, is that it really should work together, that there should be an opportunity for the alternative media to be taken seriously when they do serious stories, as opposed to pretend that they don't exist. And if they do happen to come up with something really good, let's just pretend we found the information on our own. And I think that to me, that's plagiarism. You
Yeah,
have to
yeah.
give credit to where the story comes from. And I've never had a problem doing that. But I can appreciate both. I think that there's some elements of mainstream media that we need to retain, but they need to embrace all of the best that is coming out of the alternative sphere as well.
Well, I wonder what it is when it comes to not wanting to mention. A friend of mine works at True North, Cosmin D'Souza, and he broke a story recently that CBC reported on, and he had to essentially badger CBC publicly for them to
Hmm.
admit that it was True North that gave it. I wonder, something that's really good about alternative media is that there's sort of a democracy element to it where anyone could do it. Anyone could, and any young person. I mean, we just hired a friend of mine at Post Millennial who I went to university with, and he's a younger guy. I think he's 20 years old. Doesn't really have a journalism degree, but it's just, I want to write, right? And I think that's a great thing, but I can't help but wonder if that is seen as, amateur,
Hmm.
when it comes to the mainstream. I mean, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned clickbait being one of the risks with alternative media. Would you consider deplatforming a risk? I mean, when you look at Rebel News,
Hmm.
just for an example, they just lost their YouTube channel, I think, or at
Hmm.
least I think it was demonetized. They were making, I think, $600,000 a year from that YouTube
Hmm.
channel, and now just in one fell swoop gone. So,
Yep.
I think one of the issues there is scaling it in terms of big tech. I think over the years now we're at a point where big tech has recognized alternative media as almost as a threat, with the emergence of fake news, or what is determined to be fake news. um, it, the culture war that we're in, and I don't want to rant on here, but this culture war that we're in, is it really an information war,
I think you're right, and that's another element of my disillusionment with the mainstream media is that Jack Dorsey doesn't have a journalism degree, nor does Sundar Pichai, nor does Tim Cook, nor does Mark Zuckerberg. So why is it that they are deciding what is a legitimate opinion or a legitimate perspective to be aired and what is not a legitimate opinion? Because part of what gets labeled fake news is just an alternative opinion. One of the things that really struck me, if we want to talk about COVID, and this is why I worry about COVID creating a standard that's now going to apply to everything that is controversial or unpopular, because Sundar Pichai gave testimony saying YouTube will not print anything or will not allow a video that contradicts anything Dr. Anthony Fauci says. Well, cheapers, then you're going to have to censor the first half of what Anthony Fauci was making on decisions because he didn't, he was opposed to masks and then he's in favor of masks. It was so that you have all kinds of changing rules that came about, but you have legitimate doctors being deplatformed as a result of that. So now I think we're now carrying forward one more step, right? That whatever Twitter or YouTube or Facebook decides they're going to censor, like what signal does that send to the mainstream media? Is oh my gosh, it must be so terrible. Even Twitter won't allow it. So do you think that the mainstream media is going to cover those stories? No, they're
No,
not. And
no.
so you end up with the tech giants making the call about what journalism is. And that's not how it's supposed to be. So now you've got this second initiative coming up. I haven't followed it very closely to see how Post Millennial and others are going to be impacted. But the idea that Stephen Jabot is going to regulate the internet in the same way as the CRTC regulates mainstream broadcast media, that's bananas. I don't even know how he thinks he can possibly do that. So I made the decision when I left Twitter and when I left mainstream to go on a different platform. I went on locals.com, which was a platform created by Dave Rubin, who's good friends with Jordan Peterson. And they both wanted to create platforms that allowed for genuine free speech. So it's hosted in America. The fees are paid in American dollars. You have to pay a small fee when you go on, so it prevents all the trolls from going on because you've got to have a legitimate name and a legitimate credit card. And it's like an all-in-one platform. It's like Twitter, if you want to do small clips, you can put longer posts like Facebook. You can post YouTubes, and they're also going to be expanding it out to do with live streaming. So they're creating an alternative media company that I think will be outside the reaches of meddling politicians. And so I have confidence that for every big tech censor, there's going to be an alternative, an equal and opposite reaction, if you will, of another new tech company that will come up and create a platform for those who want a broader range of discussion. And then it will be up to consumers to decide. And there'll be a portion of consumers that only want to hear from voices that are exactly like theirs and will only want to stay on those platforms that are progressive. But I think most people want to know the real deal. Most people trust their own judgment. Most people can see through something that's fake news and not legitimate, and then they can make their own minds up. And so I think that in the end, freedom of speech is going to prevail. That there will be technological solutions to this and new platforms that will resolve it. I think it's been a terrible year for freedom of speech and freedom of expression and all of our freedoms. And I think there's going to be a counter reaction to that. They've just gone too far.
If you like that video and want to see more, please make sure to subscribe to the Post Millennial. For daily news and content, please go to thepostmillennial.com and consider becoming a member. For $5 a month, you can get rid of all the advertisements on the site. If you like what I'm wearing on my head, you can go to shop.postmillennial.com where we have beanies, mugs, and t-shirts. Please consider supporting the Post Millennial however you can. It's massively appreciated. Thank you.